My mother, still holding a gravy ladle in her hand, laughed and said I would never have a house like my sister's. My father nodded, like he always does when she says something she wants to be said. My sister just smiled, looking down at her plate. I was 34, sitting at the exact same table I had eaten at since I was 6 years old, and I didn't bother to argue. A week later, I invited her over to my place for tea, and she didn't even sit down. As soon as she walked in, she turned pale, pulled out her phone and screamed into it, calling our mother. What happened in that hallway is the reason I am telling you all of this. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where quiet women keep the receipts and the truth screams. My name is Nora. I'm 34 years old, and I build houses for a living, which is exactly why this story ends the way it does. Leave a comment and make sure to subscribe. It all started over Sunday dinner. Mom, Carol, propped her phone against the gravy boat and was showing off pictures of my sister Bree's new 2-story mansion on Ridgeview Court. It had a massive kitchen island and a stone facade. Walnut floors, Nora. Do you even know how much walnut costs? I knew. I know the price of absolutely everything in a house, right down to every single nail, but I just said it looked nice. Father Ray nodded and said, Bree did good. Bree sat across from me, cutting her chicken into microscopic pieces with an air of fake modesty. And then Mom set her ladle down and delivered her verdict, clean and rehearsed. Sweetheart, you will never have a house like your sister's. Nobody flinched. The scariest part was the silence. Nobody even tried to push those words off the table. You're just jealous, aren't you? Bree asked softly, with that fake concern she saved for times when she wanted to sting the hardest. I squeezed my glass of tea. My hands were rough from work, and I was never ashamed of that. I took another look at the photo, at the entryway arch and the roofline, and in that moment, everything changed. I saw a detail in that picture that none of them had noticed, a detail you simply cannot unsee. Let me explain. I run a small crew called Hole & Co. I've been swinging a hammer for 11 years, and I learned framing from a master who rebuilt walls over a mistake of a 1/16 of an inch. 3 years ago, I bought a ruin on Maple Street. Everyone told me to bulldoze it, but I gutted the house down to the studs and built it back up. I personally calculated the loads, pulled the permits, and passed every state inspection. Now I live in a house I know, down to its bones. To my family, my silence was a sign of failure. A woman with dirt under her nails and no husband had supposedly fallen behind in life. I let them believe it. It was easier that way. But the photo of Bree's house wouldn't leave me alone. Bree is 37. She was always Mom's favorite and married Del Vance, a developer who wears expensive watches and talks about investments. All his houses were built by a contractor named Kip Dolan. 2 years ago, Kip asked me to subcontract, but I walked off the job before lunch after seeing their sloppy methods. My mother spent her whole life keeping an imaginary score. Which daughter was more successful? Bree's house was her main trophy in town. Father had gone quiet lately. He had a heart attack, owed money for medical bills, and froze every time Del's money came up. 2 days later, Mom called to announce a grand housewarming party on Ridgeview Court. I unexpectedly suggested, why doesn't Bree stop by my place for tea first? She hasn't seen my remodel. Mom thought I was just desperate for a crumb of attention before my sister's big event, so she allowed Bree to drop by. But I didn't invite her for that. I wanted her to stand on an honestly built floor and feel the difference with her own feet. That night, I studied Mom's photo through a magnifying glass. The roof ridge had a barely noticeable sag. The flashing above the entrance was overlapped so that water would run right under it. And on the foundation stone, a hairline crack was already showing. The house was settling under its own weight in its very first year. Someone had saved a fortune by making a mansion rotten on the inside. I called Deb, a drywall who admitted Del stiffed workers on pay, rushed deadlines, and passed inspections on paper through his personal paid-off assessor. On Thursday, Bree pulled up to my house. Calling it cute and cozy, she stepped inside and froze. My floor didn't give, and it didn't squeak. The joists were doubled up and blocked. She ran her finger along the door frame, an absolute perfect fit. Her eyes drifted up to the flat ceiling, and fear washed over her face. In my back hallway, part of the wall was open for electrical work. Exposed studs and double load-bearing headers over the doorway. Bree remembered the construction of her own house. She remembered her husband's framers arguing, trying to prove that the headers were way too thin, and how Dell ordered them to just cover it up with drywall, promising that the inspector isn't coming back. Standing in my hallway, she finally understood what the workers had been warning about. Her hand started shaking. She pulled out her phone and screamed into the receiver, "Mom! Come to Nora's right now." She hung up, ran outside, and sped away, without even buttoning her coat. She didn't need my words. Walls don't lie. People do. 20 minutes later, Mom burst in. "What did you say to her?" "You've always been jealous of her." Father walked in behind her, eyes glued to the floor. Mom wasn't just angry. She was terrified for the image of the mansion. They knew, not in detail, but they guessed the house was held together by tape and a prayer, and they chose to turn a blind eye for the sake of reputation. After they left, I logged into the county's online permit portal. Dell had a permit, and he had a final sign-off. But the rough-in inspection for the concealed work was completely missing. The record jumped straight to the final approval, and the assessor's name matched a guy involved in a local fraud case. At 2 in the morning, Mom's words, "You'll never have a house like that," stopped hurting me. They became my compass. I really will never have a house like that, fake and dangerous. The next day, my father called me begging, "Drop this for the sake of the family." And then he confessed. Back in the winter, he gave Dell all his retirement savings under the promise that he would double the money after selling the property. Father wasn't protecting Bree's happiness. He was protecting his last dime. Then I visited Tom, an electrician whom Dell forced to sign a release waiving financial claims under the promise of payment, only to stiff him entirely. This wasn't negligence. It was a calculated scam. I could have quietly filed a police report, but I decided to confront the lie right where it was cultivated. I filed a formal complaint with the county inspector, Marisol Reyes, a tough woman who gives no quarter to violators. It turned out Dell's properties were already under review. Marisol scheduled an on-site visit to serve a stop work order right on Saturday, the day of the housewarming party. On Saturday, the house on Ridgeview Court was packed with guests, neighbors, churchgoers, local business owners. Mom was glowing in the center of the living room, bragging about the walnut floors. Father stood against the wall, looking sick. Bree smiled tightly, and Dell was making grand promises to everyone. I walked in quietly and laid a yellow folder on the kitchen island. "What's this?" Dell asked. "Printouts from the county registry and statements from the subcontractors you scammed," I said calmly. "The house never passed its rough-in inspection, and the structural beams are already sagging." Mom jumped up. "She's lying about everything out of pure envy." At that exact moment, Inspector Marisol Reyes appeared in the doorway with her officers. "Dell Vance, Building Code Enforcement. We are serving a stop work and vacate order due to document falsification and an immediate threat of structural collapse." A dead, suffocating silence fell over the living room. Bree slowly sank right onto the walnut floor and covered her face with her hands. Dell turned as white as a sheet. Father walked over to his daughter and simply put his arm around her shoulders, completely defeated. Guests quietly and quickly began exiting the mansion. My mother's leaderboard shattered into pieces in a single second, right in front of the whole town. On my way out, I turned to Mom and said softly, "You were right. I will never have a house like this. And thank God for that." I got into my old pickup truck and drove back to Maple Street, to a house with an honest foundation and honest walls.